Rorschach first appeared in the Watchmen comic from 1986 to 1987, and he was an instant success. Even though his morality is questionable, Alan Moore, the creator of Watchmen, infused Rorschach with such depth and humanity that people were naturally attracted to the character, and he continues to be popular to this day. Rorschach was based on the Question, a character originally created by the great Steve Ditko, as a way for Ditko to explore his objectivist or Randian philosophy. The Question did not have the same level of success as Rorschach, in part because Charlton Comics, who Ditko created the Question for, stopped publishing their superhero comics in 1967, the same year he came up with the character. So Ditko was never really given a chance to develop the Question beyond a few appearances in the Blue Beetle and a 1968 one-shot called Mysterious Suspense. I'm going to do a video on that soon, so watch out for that. After DC Comics acquired the rights to Charlton's intellectual property in 1985, although they didn't acquire Charleston, which ceased comic operations entirely, Dennis O'Neil was tasked with creating a new Question series that ran for 37 issues, starting in February of 1987 and ending in April 1990. There was a special 37th issue released in March of 2010 called, appropriately, One More Question. O'Neill's Question was very different from Ditko's. He was still a vigilante fighting for justice, but he didn't have the hard-right edge that Ditko's Question did. However, O'Neill would use the character to explore different philosophies and highlight books readers should investigate in each issue. So he brought a different approach to the Question, but very much not in line with Ditko's original thoughts on the characters. And that leads us to issues 17 and 18 of the Question, where we have the Rorschach crossover. In issue 17, the Question is chasing after two bad guys who have modeled themselves after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They literally call themselves that. And they only use plastic guns that are designed to pass through metal detectors. In fact, they make these plastic guns themselves, and they plan to ship these guns around the world. One of the bad guys uses the plastic gun to break the other out of prison. Vic Sage chases after them. They escape in a helicopter. He jumps onto the helicopter and holds on for as long as he can, unfortunately losing his grip and falling to the ground, presumably to his death, but instead he lands on a whole old man, killing him and surviving. Vic Sage tracks the bad guys to Seattle, so he hops on a flight to go after them. At the airport newsstand, he picks up a copy of Alan Moore's Watchmen and is fascinated by Rorschach. We are very, very meta here, people. He thinks he wants to be more like Rorschach in his crime fighting. Unfortunately, his attempt to go all Rorschach on the henchmen leads to the Question being knocked on the head and dragged in the snow to be shot. The bad guys ask him if he has any last words, and he says, yeah, Rorschach sucks. I've complained about this before, but I think one of the problems with Dennis O'Neill's portrayal of the Question is he's relatively ineffective as a crime fighter. He's good as an investigative reporter, but when he goes out there, despite all of the talk about his training in the various martial arts, but he does seem to wind up being beaten up by the criminals he's going after a lot more often than other heroes do. And maybe that's Dennis O'Neill's way of showing that a non-powered superhero would really struggle in real-world situations. Green Arrow shows up at the end and saves the day, and we're continued in issue 18. When we get to issue 18, we switch a little bit, because this is familiar territory to Dennis O'Neill. This is two superheroes on a road trip, and ostensibly two superheroes with very different philosophies on a road trip together. But that's actually part of the problem with this Question, because he's so watered down that his philosophies aren't that different from Green Arrow, at least not as far as we can tell. There's no immediate contrast. Much later, we would see a different version of the question very much go toe-to-toe with Green Arrow in, having contrasting philosophies. Instead, what we're left with is the Green Arrow not trusting the question, and the question trying to prove his worth to Green Arrow. We also get a superficial discussion of Sun Tzu's The Art of War as part of this book, and quotes from the book, and contrasting different situations they're in with Sun Tzu, which is, again, interesting, but again, at a superficial level. We end with the way every comic book should end: a couple of snowmobiles blowing up a helicopter, which is just about the most 80s way to end a comic book with non-powered superheroes, so I was a big fan of that. I like these two issues. I think the Rorschach thing was a bit of a fake out, the lots of build up to having Rorschach and Question in the same comic book, but having it as a dream sequence just feels like a little bit of a cop out. On the other hand, the exploration of the objectivist philosophies in issue 17 and then Sun Tzu in issue 18, even though it was at a superficial level, I think that was really interesting. And that's one of those things that I think O'Neill tries to do well. I don't know. He succeeds sometimes he doesn't. But the story itself, ignoring the philosophical overtones, the story itself is a good story. It feels like what you want from a late 80s comic. Overall, I enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. Please check out some of the other videos on this channel.